Discussing the budget. Confirmation of the agenda. Marie Campbell and Councillor Wadden. All in favor? Carried. Disclosure of pecuniary interest, if any. None noted. Okay. Moving to number 4. Draft budget discussion. You want to lead off, Donna?
Actually, Dwayne's going to begin here for us tonight.
Well, thanks, Council, for meeting with us. As the slide there indicates, I wanted to update Council in terms of where we're at in the budget process. And just as a quickly recap, at our last meeting, we were at a 14.49% budget increase, or $708,015 spending increase over 2017. And at that time, staff brought forward some items for Council's discussion. Council discussed them and gave direction to staff on a number of those items, and those revisions have been made to the draft budget. And those changes that Council directed have had a positive effect on the budget. And we were at a point of a levy increase of 4.95%, which was a spending increase of $242,000 over 2017. So that, as we understand, was Council's. If we were around the 5%, Council was acceptable of that. Since that time, we have 3 items to bring Council up to speed on. That do have a significant impact on the budget. The 3 items are the police budget. We received a revised police budget that Don will go over in more detail. We also want to update Council in terms of the status of the budget regarding the Emergency Services Training Center. And we'll briefly touch on pay equity and market review study that's ongoing. It does have a financial impact. That study itself, the consultant will be here next Monday evening. We'll go over it into a lot more detail. But what we've been working on is, in terms of, for the purposes of tonight, trying to get understanding in terms of what impact, if any, it would have. And we'll speak to that briefly tonight. But the details of that will be presented in much more detail next week. So I'll turn over to Don.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to take you back a little bit to from last meeting, some of the revisions that we made to get us from 14.49 down to just under the 5%. So one of the decisions that Council had reflected was the museum operating costs, and so we revised the budget to show the building being closed in 2018. Also to have the concession booths closed as of April 30th. There was a public works staff that was not going to be replaced. An increase that we had to deal with was an increase in the township's portion of the drain assessment affecting roads. We had 15,000 in the budget, and we had to take it up to 70 in light of the new responsibilities that the township will have for ongoing drains in 2018. We made a number of revisions to the economic development budget, but there was no overall impact. For those on the committee, you know that there's been shifting amongst the lines, but overall the bottom line has stayed the same. As outlined by Pat's department last meeting, we talked about, Council gave approval for the purchase of a new multi-purpose floor cleaning machine, and that added $6,500 to the budget, but that was to be offset from reserves, so there was actually no impact. We have our streetlight LED project, the capital cost added in. It wasn't there last time, but it was a capital approved project. And as well, Sean had brought forward a report on Summit Drive. So both of those are in the budget with no impact. We were waiting for information on the 2018 portion of the water and sewer CWWF projects, and that's the water and wastewater, and that's our master plan project. So, and that involved last year the video camera work, and so there's a number of initiatives that we're working on for 2018. Early On, which is a name change in Val's department that used to be called Early Years, and that's also a project that was fully funded through the county. So we had received some additional funding there, but again, it didn't result in an impact to the overall budget. We had funded the rec master plan from reserves, but since that time, I think we've talked with Pat and with the number of priority projects that are on the slate for this year, we feel that we're going to have to pull that, even though it has no effect on the budget, we feel that we're going to have to pull that project from our list this year. It's just time's not going to permit to get that done. We had some additional landfill equipment costs. I believe that Sean brought forward a report to you about some of the costly repairs we've had on the machinery out there, and so that was offset by reserves. And Val had done some work revising her daycare center costs. As you know, the Arthur Street tender had been received and awarded since the last budget meeting, and so we have reflected this new budget to change and change to what the tender price actually says. And we're also using the OSIF formula-based money to offset most of our road projects now in light of what the new amounts are for Arthur Street. Last year, you approved the market study, as Dwayne alluded to, and the most of those costs will be incurred in 2018. And council had approved that study to proceed with being fully funded from reserve. So again, there's been $40,000 added to the costs offset from reserves. You've made a number of changes with agreements through the building department and all of that in conjunction with drainage and property standards. So all that's been worked in and it didn't have any significant impact. And then the department heads have made a number of changes throughout their departments. We had our insurance figures and such, so we were able to update all of those numbers. So the one, as Dwayne has already explained, we had three large significant items that we wanted to update you on. And from the last budget, Trevor just brought to my attention that we added for the revised police budget, it was going to add $424,000, but Trevor had just brought to my attention that there was actually another $26,000 in capital, which needs to be added into that, which will affect the levy for the Wingham ward. So at this point, what I'd like to do is turn the budget over to Trevor, and he can give you an update on what's happening with the whole budget. Now, I gave you each a hard copy because of the revised budget, because it's very difficult to read up on the screen. So Trevor, if you would like to take it away, thank you.
Okay, so what I will say is that police budget is based on our negotiations with the police association. So as you can tell on the most of the increase of this budget is with regards to salaries and benefits. So the salaries and benefits are based on the assessment or the association agreement that we based on was for 6 officers, the increase in their pay based on retroactive to January 2018 was 4.5%. And then effective in July, we've put in additional officers, 5 additional officers, which would be 4 constables and 1 sergeant. So the police services board believed that through the recommendation from the chief that the number of officers that we would have after we have the full hire of the 2 fully trained officers on shift, it would be very difficult for 1 sergeant to properly manage those officers. So the police services board accepted the fact that we need to hire an additional sergeant in order to complement the existing force. So that would start in July. The cost in here for those officers, the 5 additional ones are obviously the sergeant rate with regards to the association agreement, but all the other ones are based on the first constable rate between July and December. So obviously there's some unknown with regards to that. So we are in the process of hiring under the Police Services Board. The chief has started that process. There's no guarantee that we'll have actually officers on the ground, depending on what we get as of July. But it was important that we thought to make sure we include that as part of the budget, because if we did get them, if they were fully trained or trained staff that we would hire, they would be hitting the ground running, and therefore those costs would be associated to the force. The benefits obviously are based on an estimate of what the officers' benefits are based on the agreement. It's roughly around 30% is what we budget for. So that's all to do with their Canada pension, all that other stuff, as well as their health and dental and all that other nice benefits that they have with regards to that all employees have, that the municipality has. So that is these instances shouldn't be a surprise to this council based on, this is some of the information that was brought up at the public meeting with regards to having a fully trained 2 shifts or 2 individuals on shift 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, based on that discussion at the public meeting. And the information that we got from that public meeting, the board, I took it as that the public understood what they wanted, and they believed that we would to make sure that we had adequate staff from a health and safety perspective. And the one thing I wanted to mention is about the salary increase. So the salary increase, we've been limping along the last 5 years or 4 years, I would say, with trying to mitigate cost from a police service standpoint, their actual wages. During the negotiation, it was made very clear that that wasn't something that they were willing to accept anymore. And arguably the Police Services Board, as well as the negotiating team, believe that we couldn't have the fact that how could we justify police services around our area, Hanover, West Grey, Saugeen Shores, all those types of things were getting a significant, what they were getting for wages, our officers were not getting. So one of the conversations that we had at the Police Services Board was, if this particularly was an issue and it could go all the way to the point where arbitration or whatever the case may be, there's a lot of the background or information that would suggest that they would probably get equivalent pay for what they equivalently do. Fair and equitable is what the association believes, and we believe it was fair and equitable what we did. So overall, the overall agreement was 4.5% this year, 4.0% in 2019. At the end of this agreement, they will be equivalent to the average salary of a first-class constable in five associations that surround Wingham. So that includes the OPP, that includes West Grey, Hanover, Saugeen Shores, and those types of people. So, you know, it is a big change from, but I think the discussion was, and the public had their say on that, and so did council, and this is what came about. So I would take questions if there is any from council, but the additional money for capital is obviously the 24,000 is for actual clothes of the new recruits, because we are responsible with providing them health and safety and their uniform and all that stuff. So, and the other one is an additional $2,400 to replace the firearms that we currently have, but also buy new firearms for the officers that we hire. We no longer can piecemeal those firearms together. We've been told multiple times, and the chief can back me here, and he's been part of that conversation, that we can't piece those together anymore. It becomes a safety hazard. So we're dealing with those at this point.
Councillor Wadden.
I recall in our discussions earlier, there was a need to have an additional police person available in order to keep the two-person coverage. I don't recall hearing the need for another sergeant. Is that a new request, or?
Yeah. So
is that two new positions?
No, it is not. So the original discussion at the public meeting was we would need to hire 4 additional officers to cover the two people per shift. That was the discussion at the public meeting, was 4 new officers. The additional officer, the sergeant, is a new discussion, only because after the public meeting, the chief looked at the overall strategic of the force, and the fact that we have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week coverage. How could we ask a sergeant who's on days to be responsible for officers that are on nights? And you need some coverage from a managerial perspective, but also to understand the hierarchy of the police service. They have to be responsible to somebody. So the idea is that we need, the police services board believes that this is a request is valid. They discussed it, but also in one respect, the conversation has been that currently right now, the sergeant that we have today is included in the association agreement. So currently right now, the association has a sergeant in it. One of the things would we be changing once this hire would happen is the discussion about moving one of those sergeants into what they would consider to be called an inspector role. So therefore, what happens is that particular individual is sort of the deputy chief inspector. So the chief would have somebody to talk about operations with no regard to worry about conflict with the association. Because currently right now, in the negotiations that we just had, Sergeant Foxon was part of the negotiating team for the association. Well, he's also the sergeant. He's also the one, Chief Poole's right hand. So it's hard sometimes for the chief to talk about operational stuff because of the concern that those changes, those impacts might filter down when they don't need to be to the association.
I think it's unfortunate that we didn't know about this additional sergeant at the time we were discussing the changes in the police force, but that's water under the bridge, I guess.
Go ahead.
So I understand from Councillor Wadden's concern that this particular instance, but if I can recall, it didn't seem to matter what number we put up there that the impact of this police service was going to be. They were very adamant, the public was very adamant, and council took that upon themselves to accept that. Again, the sergeant is about $100,000 or $120,000 a year. If we're increasing the budget in year one, $400,000, if $100,000 would have made a difference, I would be far pressed to accept that, because the council and the public knew of more than 75% of the increase before we ever had the discussion.
Deputy Reeve.
Through Reeve to the chief. These 3-4 constables, are they ready to go? Like, you're not pulling them out of training, just finished your training and coming into the force to get started? Because that's what we used to do sometimes.
We have put out advertisements for experienced and recruits both. So it'll be a hodgepodge of ready to go or not, like have to go through the recruit process. So far, I've got about 20 applications, and only one of them is experienced. So that'd be basically the ratio, 4-1. Anyway.
Well, that was kind of what I was kind of expecting, but
Yeah. The majority will be recruits.
okay, good. Okay.
Anything Further questions or comments?
Okay, so I'll move on then to the next piece, which is the revised ESTC budget. So Deputy Chief Chad Krager is not able to be with us tonight, but I want to go over the EST budget and I'll explain it to you as we work through it. And if you still have any questions, then I can certainly clarify those with Chad. And again, you have a hard copy on your table there. So the first budget that we received from the EST was a balanced budget, meaning that there was no impact on the ratepayers. It was anticipated to be a break-even budget. Since that time, as you know, we had finished the 2017 year end. We had budgeted for a $50,000 cost to the taxpayers last year, but it turned out to be about $121,000. And council had passed a motion to transfer that additional $70,000 to the accumulated deficit for the EST Center. So the changes in this budget reflect pretty much what last year's budget was, meaning that we're adding about $125,000 to the budget to reflect an operating cost for that center of $125,000. So what Chad had done was gone through the revenue and basically budgeted for only the revenue he knew at the time we were working on that. So your previous budget, I believe, showed anticipated revenue of about $295,000, but there's really only about $25,000 in revenue confirmed. Now, with all the work that they're doing and such, we do expect that to be much better, but he was budgeting based on really realistic figures and courses that he knew for sure was going ahead. So at the same time as well, the expenditures were anticipated to be $295,000 in the last budget. And so that has been revised to $150,919. So where some of the changes are basically is to do with putting on of the courses and the cost for instructors. In the last budget as well, there was a full-time person to run the EST for a full year at $72,000, and then that has been reduced down to $42,000 as we're already headed to May as we speak today. So some of the other things that didn't change, of course, we have the loan payments, the principal interest, and the operating costs to the heat and hydro and such that to actually run the building. So it's really been pared down to realistic terms as to what courses were known at the time that the budget was revised. Now, of course, as I said, I want to reiterate that with any work that's being done, they certainly hope to better this position before year end and as the year moves on. But that's a realistic outlook for what we know as of today's date. So are there any questions I can help you with? Or I can refer to Chad if I...
Councillor Knott.
Under expenditures, contract, excuse me, contract instructors.
Mm-hmm.
Although we have no income from contract instructor courses, we still have $6,000 in salaries. Why?
Right. So that's basically up in all the course revenue is lumped up into the top under the 20,300.
So in other words, they are anticipating contract instructor courses. You just didn't break it out, is that
That's
what you're
right. Yes, that's right.
saying? Okay. Can I
Supplementary.
carry on under in the budget here? I suddenly see $500 in accommodations. What is that for?
For those instructors that we were just speaking of.
But we didn't spend any money last year. Our 2017 actual was zero.
That's right.
Why is it suddenly $500 in 2018?
To do with an instructor that they're hoping to have put on a course.
So Go ahead.
Can you explain why the loan principal payment dropped $10,000?
From last year to this year, as you see, the loan payment actually didn't. When I revised it, you're looking at the actual. If you look over to the 2016 budget, it was 26,000 for principal and it's 27 now, 20,000 for interest and it's 19,000 now. So the total for last year is the same. I just before year end reallocated in between principal and interest, but the total was the same. And it's the same for carrying forward from last year to this year. The principal goes up, but the interest goes down. But the total of what they pay is the same. Any other questions?
Go ahead.
Are we still heating that building with propane?
At the EST?
Yeah.
Mhm, yes.
And why we have not looked into hooking that up to natural gas?
That is a question that can definitely be put forward as to checking into what adaptations would have to be done. Because I'm pretty sure there is a gas line goes by on one side or the other of the road there.
It's right there on the north side.
Okay.
I mean, we can look into that. I can share that it is a shared double tank that is used by the training grounds and the building. So I think you're not going to switch the training grounds over to natural gas. They would likely stay as propane for the propane burn. So it would mean a lot of, well, not a lot, but it's a manageable decision. If council wants to go there, we can look at the cost, but you have to change the tanks over and then bring natural gas into the building and switch out the equipment where it's required. It's burning propane. If it's unable to adapt automatically, but we can take a look at that.
In most cases, it's a simple Venturi change. The equipment wouldn't have to be changed.
It's something that can be looked into and done.
So is there any further questions on the EST? Okay, so we'll keep moving along then. So what I wanted to do was to show you then, and so then also as Dwayne had mentioned earlier, and you'll hear more about it next week, but for the pay equity and market study, some of the preliminary numbers we've seen is about adding about $80,000 or an additional 1.64% onto the budget. So as we move through our examples, we can tell individually, piece by piece, what that impact would be. Now, as Trevor was just explaining to you, so I do need to now add the $26,000 in capital to the Wingham Ward for the policing capital that Trevor just explained to you. So that will increase these numbers as we move forward, and I'll make sure that I revise that. So this is an actual property in Wingham. Last year, and it's a residential property. And as you know, that no two properties increase by the same amount. It depends on how much each property, the assessment on each property has gone up. And you'll see some go up 3-4%, some less than 0.5%. It depends on how they were assessed. So this particular property had an assessment last year of $172,500. It went up about 3.19% to $178,500. Last year's taxes in dollars was $3,368. So after our February 8th meeting and all those changes had been made down to the 4.95%, this property would have seen a total of $80.77 added to its tax bill, increased over last year. But then when we added the EST in, that, as I said, that was 2.56%. So that particular item added $48.72. And then the police, which this will go up, added 8.67%. So for $317.40. And then the proposed market review would be $31.16. So this particular property in Wingham, a residential property, would go up $478.05, and that will go up now also with the extra $26,000 that we're going to add in capital. So the next one is a property assessed at just over $300,000. Now, this particular property didn't have a whole lot of assessment increase. The assessment increase was only 0.41%, but this property was already paying last year $5,941.19. So because the assessment didn't go up very much, actually after the February 8th meeting, this property would have seen a very small decrease of $21.30. So then when we add the EST in, it would have added $83.64, and the policing impact for this property would have add $544.73, and pay equity at $53.49. So this property will go up $660.55, and now it will be a bit more than that with the extra capital. This is a commercial property in Wingham, and so this assessment went up 1.3%. So this is a commercial property assessed at $825,000. Last year, the total taxes was $24,655. Again, the after February 8th, it would have added $97.63. The EST has added $248.43. The policing on this one was $1,618, and then the pay equity is $158.88. So this commercial property will go up $2,123, and as I said, it will be a little bit more than that once we add that in. So then, if we move over to the Blythe ward, this is a residential property assessed at $118 last year, going up 2.52% to $123,000. And so last year's tax is $1,997.66. So after the February 8th, it would have went up $62.29. EST added $33.67. Leasing, of course, isn't applicable, and the market study $21.54. So this property, as the budget sits, would go up $117.49 in Blythe. Next, in East Wawanosh, this is a two-part property. This is a farm with a residence and then the farm portion. And so this residence went. Actually, I have those numbers reversed, pardon me. So that was last year was $65,750, and it's now $69,800. So that went up 6.16%. So last year's taxes on just the house, $1,027. For after February 8th, it would have went up $43.82. Then with the EST, $19.11. Of course, police doesn't count. And the pay equity $12.22. So this house portion of that property would go up $75.15. And then when we move to the farm portion, then of course we've seen some big differences in the farm assessment. As you can see, this particular farm property assessment went up almost 15%. So from $576,750 up to $663,200. So the farm portion of this tax bill was $2,253. After February 8th, it was would have added $291.51. Then the EST $45.39, pay equity $29.02. So this farm property, the farm portion only, will go up $365.92, and we'll pay a total of $2,619.20. So those are some examples I wanted to give you on a piece-by-piece basis so that we could have a look at how each piece affected the individual properties as we were working our way through them. So as I was saying earlier, then now we're sitting at we were at 17.82. By the time I add the 26,000 in, that will be more than 18%, and we were looking at 871,000. So more in spending. So we'll be up close to $900,000 more in spending this year over last. When I make those that last change. So I think at this point, then what I'd like to do is we as we were saying, you'll have the presentation next week, and then Dwayne is going to maybe go over some of these some of our next steps before we get to next week.
Sure. So as far as Donna's indicated, next you'll receive more detailed information during the pay equity market study. There is some decisions to make there, but you'll hear the advice of your consultant. Other considerations, things. So right now we've been working on the 2018 budget, which is natural, and we need to do that. But going forward, in terms of thinking ahead, we have the museum that we need to work. We'll be bringing reports back to council at some point for that. Trailer park is another one that we've talked about. Hutton Heights is another one. And asset management with the new provincial regulations and legislation. We have additional requirements that we have to meet. And the first of those takes effect on July 1st of 2019. So basically, we have a little more than a year away, and then we will be coming forward to council with a plan in terms of how we're going to meet that. But that we certainly are anticipating that we will be looking at a budget increase or budget impact as we go forward for 2019. In terms of the budget itself, we're going to bring forward, unless there's any further discussion here, the final budget for council's consideration at our May 7th meeting. We'll be bringing forward the bylaws for council's consideration. And just in terms of the last point, as you can appreciate, in terms of, as Donna showed some of the numbers there, there are some residents that, they're going to open their tax bills, and there's going to be a substantial difference from last year to this year. So just in terms of messaging and educating Wingham Ward taxpayers, it's a concerted effort on the part of staff and council in terms of, communicating and educating, the public, and in particular the Wingham Ward residents, in terms of, why the tax bill from last year to this year is so varied. So I don't know if there's anything else, unless there's anything down that I haven't covered.
No, I was just going to say, though, but as always, when the passing of the budget doesn't stop the process. I mean, as we move forward on projects, we're always trying to get the best price through tendering and negotiating and those types of things. So, the budget process really never stops. It's always an ongoing trying to get the best dollar for whatever service that we're offering or project as we move along through the year. And then the big part of it, of course, is monitoring it to ensure that we stay on budget. So, there's still a lot of work to do even once the budget does get passed. But here we are, as I said, moving into May. We started out great guns in October, and then we ran into a number of items that is seeing us still looking at passing a budget in May. So I guess we're looking at some direction from council. As I said, you have another meeting next week. And then after that, our first meeting in May would be May the 7th. Normally I do some sort of a highlight presentation at that meeting. We advertise that meeting to let the public know that we're going to, it's our intention to pass the budget that evening. I mean, unless, depending on what further discussion we have here this evening. And then, as I said, we go through the highlights so that anybody who hasn't been following the budget process, at least they have a Coles Notes version of the highlights from this year's budget process. So does council have any further comments or direction for staff as we've worked our way through the revisions?
Councilor Slate?
I hate to ask this question because that's the comment that I always ask that we shouldn't do, but what comes to mind is the rec study that we talked about we were taking out. Is there any capital that's affecting the tax base this year that we really don't think we're gonna get to? From that, and I'm the only reason I'm asking is that from a Wingham ratepayer's perspective, I will tell you right now, on May the 7th at about 10 o'clock, my phone's probably gonna light up off the hook if this budget passes. And I understand that as a police services board, we're responsible for that policing number, but we took the guidance of the public as well as this council on what their decision was. So as much as I am the chair of the police services board and a Wingham councillor, I really don't think it's fair to the Wingham Police Services Board or the North Huron Police Services Board to get dumped on, and the association, mind you, get dumped on the fact that this is what it is. So part of it for me is I have some discontent on the fact that I had to present this budget to council with what it is, only because of what's come down the pipe on the discussions with council in the public meeting. So I just want to be clear that council as a whole needs to take some responsibility with regards to the Wingham ratepayers increase, and not just the Wingham constituents to the Wingham ward representatives, because I think that's ultimately what's going to happen, because they will look at that we didn't represent them, and I don't think it's fair. From my perspective, I voted against it. So I'm, as a police services chair, it's not about the association and not about the police service. It's about costs, and this tells me right now that for a ratepayer with $350,000 assessment, it's unaffordable, it's unattainable. Because that budget is only half a year of additional officers. Throw another half a year onto it. So it's not going to get any easier. So and I understand Councillor Wadden's concern about the sergeant and stuff, but that is what it is when you hire additional staff and you have to manage them and you have to pay for them. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear that council as a whole needs to take some responsibility for the policing costs and not necessarily just the police services board. Because we got held what we want, what the public wanted, and that's what we did. And we as the police services board and myself brought it to council with all the information, as much information as we could provide and the public could provide. So, anybody in that public meeting shouldn't be sticker shock for that at all. So that's a comment. But if my question was if there's any capital that's going to affect the tax base that we aren't going to do, or we have any indication that we aren't going to even think about doing, I think we remove it. To be quite honest with you, I think we remove it to reduce some of the impact to this, because 18% is going to be, it's not acceptable in my mind.
So just in terms of before we brought this forward, senior management were asked to go back and re-review their budgets. They did revise them from 14% to get us down, and then council got us down further to the 4.95. But senior management team was instructed to go back and re-review their budgets because of what we brought forward here. And we know in terms of the concerns that are going to be certainly raised. There's some minor things done, but I think from senior management has got it down as low as we can go, unless we start cutting service. And again, we have the museum on, look at museum, look at the trailer park, there's some things there, Hutton Heights asset management, on a go forward basis. But I think for 2018, I mean, we've got it down where we can get it. I'll maybe let Donna speak in terms of some money that is in reserves that the council could consider. But I'll let Donna speak to that.
So one of the things we talked about very briefly was the Westerio money. So as we were talking about dealing with, if we had gone with the OPP, we were talking about the one-time exit costs and the possibility of using some of the Westerio money that's been earmarked for the Wingham Ward to mitigate some of those costs. So we have less than $400,000 in the Westerio reserve at that time. And each year we take out of that, there's two pieces to that. We have a dividend, which we get once a year, and then we earn interest on our shareholder notes. So we earn about $17,000 of interest every year, and we use that every year and always have to offset, although it's small, the Wingham police costs. So we always have taken, that's been a practice we started years ago, just using the interest to offset the policing costs. So we do have some money in that reserve. The only thing is we have a number of Wingham only issues, as you know, that we were, had that money in reserves for. And once it's gone, it's gone. So, there is the possibility of using some of that money to lessen the impact. But as Councillor Sype has just pointed out, this year's impact isn't the full impact. Next year's impact is going to be even greater because we're adding $450,000 now just for this additional piece of policing over and above what we had in the first round of the budget. So next year at a full year cost, that's going to be significantly more than that as well. So we really have to look at our future costs and how we're going to manage that in conjunction with asset management planning and all those other future commitments that we have as well.
Question for Councillor Sype. That there's uniforms and guns. Is there anything for extra automobile or?
There is not put anything right now into the budget for another automobile. The automobiles that we have currently would suffice. That's what the chief has established. There is some concern with one of the obviously with the one vehicle, the Charger. However, with what we're dealing with, I think the chief decided in this particular case to vote on the caution and not particularly put another vehicle in, and the police services board accepted that. The fact that it is what it is, and so there is no other vehicle in capital at this point. It's just
I didn't see any, and
so the three vehicles that they currently have today would remain, and would remain until the need would arise that we would need to get one.
I didn't see anything when I was looking, so that I just wanted the assurance that that was the way it was. Thank you.
So I was just going to say, so you have your presentation next week as well, but that aside then, are we in a position then to work on the presentation and do the advertising for passing the budget then at the May 7th council meeting? Staff are looking for direction as to how to get this budget passed so we can get some of our tenders out and get some of our projects underway.
Councillor
The equity
Hallahan.
thing now, is that actual what's going to cost us is 80,000, or are we maybe in for a surprise there too?
We're in that, sorry, we're in that ballpark, in terms of, there's three components. This will be explained next Monday, but there's pay equity, there's, market adjustment, and then there's, COLA, cost of living. There's three. So what we've been doing is going through line by line, very detailed, because I want to make sure, but we're in that, there's still some tweaking that's happening as early as today, but we know that we're in that 80 area. We wanted to get some idea as to where we're sitting. Are we sitting 20, 50, 80, 100, 150? We know we're sitting in around the 80. So.
Councillor Syed.
I would, I guess if staff have done what they can, the one thing I would like to see though is what we believe that West Aerial money was earmarked for, those costs that in Wingham Ward, that those would be related to the 450,000 or what it was. And I'd like to kind of get an idea from the council perspective what the priority on those, because if this policing thing is a more of a higher priority, maybe some of that cost get associated to that. They'll alleviate some of our pain. Obviously, it's going to be a one-time alleviation. There's going to be a problem next year. But I would like to know what those. I would like to get re-educated on what those are. Not necessarily, and it would be just to know what the adjustment would be. Obviously, we know our high point is going to be the 18 or whatever %, but obviously, if we can reduce that as a one-time, then it is what it is. But I just can't remember. I can't recall what those projects are from just the Wingham Ward for that we had earmarked that West Aerial money for.
Basically, it's the greatest need type of thing for the dividend and the interest, and that basically it's. I think there's reflection of what the greatest need will be in this budget. That the one thing I would say is look into rate of return that you get on that in comparison to what borrowing costs are too. That as to whether you're better just to take the yearly payment, or whether you're better to dispense with an asset. Donna.
Yeah, so the main project that it was earmarked for was to pay off the complex. So we had saved up our dividends for a number of years. And so one of our goals was to pay the complex off early. So back at that point, we didn't have a lot of debt. We were trying to get the debt off again, because the debt only was area rated just to the Wingham Ward, where the operating costs were spread out across the whole municipality. So in our efforts to mitigate the Wingham Ward taxes at that time, we had taken two withdrawals from, as Neil was saying, from our shareholders note, and we applied those. We were allowed to make balloon payments once a year, so we did that twice. And then the third payment that we had was we saved up the dividends, and then we were able to pay the balance of when the loan came open, so that we had no penalty to pay. Then that's when we had been saving the dividend, waiting for that, and then that's how we were able to pay that off early. So other than that, that was the main one. And so then, as I said, what council has always discussed, and I mean, it's really just a discussion of council, because there's really nothing else written on paper other than like you're talking about different projects that only affect Wingham Ward. And so, as I said, there's nothing really else on paper to say, as a Wingham project, this must be it.
Okay, so that answers my question. There isn't anything earmarked right now. We just have a reserve of 400,000 that's sitting there that
Yes,
can be
yeah.
utilized in the past, because that's what it's been utilized for the Wingham Ward. The question is whether council wants to continue to use that only for the Wingham Ward or use it for another project perspective.
But maybe I shouldn't make this comment, but the Wingham PUC that went into Westario is Wingham Ward property as far as I'm concerned. Okay, Councillor Vaughn.
I know that putting off capital is a mug's game, but are there capital projects that could be postponed without too much damage?
Well, we have, as both Dwayne has explained and as we talked about with Trevor, the rec master plan that we talked about didn't have any effect on the overall budget because it was going to be fully funded from reserves. We do have $1.7 million in capital projects. But a lot of them are tied to something. So say, for example, we've let the tender on Arthur Street. We have to do the final cover on Westmoreland Street. We need to continue our tar and chip program. The streetlight LED program, council's already approved. It's over $400,000. We've talked about some roof problems and those types of things that we were wanting to continue with. So there's really not a lot. As I said, we've been back and forth through this, through the capital and the operating, several times to, and I do think it's important, though I understand what Councillor Sype is saying, but we have fallen behind on our capital projects the last couple of years just due to a number of staff changes and those sorts of things. So, I think it's really important that we get on our capital path and we certainly want to, as I said, Dwayne talked about Reg 588, the asset management plan that's in place and all the work that we need to do with that over the next few years to be sustainable and make sure that our assets are in place for the future. So, we certainly have a lot of work to do as we move forward and try to keep our costs in check for sure. Does council have any further comments or questions for staff or direction that we can investigate before your next meeting Monday night? Now, Wayne, you're explaining the format of next Monday night. It's at 7 o'clock and it's in closed session.
Councillor Knott.
I have a request for you to Sean. Do a small favor for me, and in your public works budget, can you put subtotals under each of those categories that you've listed there? Your roads, facilities, and so on. Your gravel pits, and as you go through a couple of pages there are no subtotals on any of those. It's very hard to look at them on a comparative basis.
Yeah, I can certainly just put some totals in there. It's not a problem.
So a spreadsheet should be relatively simple.
We took them out because we thought it was too much clutter, so we can certainly put them back in.
No, and it saves me trying to read the detail and add it up. See on each individual basis. I do have another question. I'm just trying to find it now. The transfer to reserves is $318,000 in here.
For water and sewer?
For water and sewer.
Yes, that's right. So what that is if you flip to, I'm just going to get with you there for the, I'm thinking that is in, water is 312 and sewer is
300.
300. Yeah, is that what you meant, or was there another one?
No, I'm asking
Those two?
Those two.
Yeah, so if you look up above in the revenue for each of those, that is the $15 a month that we collect. So you'll see it as a revenue item at the top, identified as long-term reserve revenue coming in. And then we transfer exactly that same amount to our long-term capital reserve as we're saving for infrastructure for both of those. And those two reserves are kept completely separate and identified as long-term reserve money.
Okay, no, that's fine. Now we know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Councillor Syke?
Yeah, the other question was that we did, as part of the asset management review, there was a capital reserve amount that we were asked to put into reserve. I can't recall what that number was off the top of my head, but that would be above, but that would have complete effect on the taxation budget completely. Obviously, I was a proponent to leave it in,
Right.
because I think we've shortchanged ourselves for far too many years with regards to capital. But the question is that what could you please remind me what that number was?
Yes, so that was $127,826.
Councillor Knott?
Through yourself to Treasurer. Don, I've asked this question before and I still don't understand why we keep showing a budget dollar variance instead of a variance of the budget to the actual, since we have them. I can understand when we don't have the actuals why we might do that, but we have 2017 actuals and it would be far more relevant to be looking at our budget versus our actuals from last year. Can we not do that?
Yeah, we can,
And can we get rid of the 2016 budget? I couldn't care less.
yeah, and we can take that out.
That would be cleaning this up a little bit. But I definitely would like to see that budget variance be between our actual 2018 budget and our 2017 actual.
Okay, we can do that.
Far more relevant words like where we're up or down in our expenditures and revenue.
I guess and you know, probably for council, that makes sense. For us, working on the budget to budget is what we look at. But certainly we can, for us, we can look at what we need and then you guys get what you need. But for us, the budget to budget is what we use. But budget to actual is fine.
Can we have that for the next meeting?
Possibly. Certainly. Like, so you're not
This is
looking
on
at
an
the,
It's
yeah.
on an Excel spreadsheet. That should be
Yeah.
pretty easy inclusion in here.
Right, so you're not having the whole budget again though for Monday night. So certainly for the May 7th, when we put that forward for the passing, definitely we can have that in.
Yeah, I'd like to see it as soon as possible because I may have more questions once I see that number.
Okay, is there anything further then from council before we bring on them?
Well, it looks like there's a whole bunch of us have these little questions. What can we do? But I think the numbers are in front of us that doing little things isn't going to change the overall effect that much. So I think we're going to have to live through this. So, is there any further questions or comments? Well, that would take me to the confirmatory bylaw then. Councillor Syke moves. Councillor Ritzman seconds. All in favor? Carried. And the all-important adjournment motion, Councillor Syke, Deputy Reeve Campbell, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.